Last week, the Minnesota Vikings ended up moving a key date back on one of their starting cornerbacks that indicated they were not going to franchise tag that corner, which got most people believing that the Vikings were going to franchise tag Sam Darnold. Adam Schefter had initially put it out there that Sam Darnold will be franchise tagged, and then most likely the Vikings will end up trading him to another team. And now we're hearing the opposite. Adam Schefter, Ian Rapper, all the insiders have kind of put this tweet out around the same time. Adam Schefter said that the Vikings quarterback Sam Darnold is unlikely to be franchise tagged ahead of Tuesday's 4 p.m. Eastern Time deadline per league sources. So that's today at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, so just a couple hours from now is the actual deadline, which means Sam Darnold's going to become a free agent. Which also means if you're a team that needs a quarterback, you don't have to trade for Sam Darnold at this point. He's going to be a free agent. So you can target this guy to potentially bring him to your team, and you're not going to have to give up a first-round pick or a second-round pick. He's free to come to you. All you got to do is just pay him whatever it is that he wants. And I think for the Raiders, they should be all over this. Now, Adam Schefter does say that the Minnesota Vikings are still interested in working to re-sign Sam Darnold, but it is likely to be without any tag. Now, I want you guys to think about this, right? Osa Odigizua became a free agent, or he would have became a free agent. The Cowboys did not want to go down that path, so they franchise tagged him. That was 2 days ago that they franchise tagged him. Today, he signed a brand new contract worth, I think, $80 million, or I think about $20 million a year. The Vikings could have taken that same approach with Sam Darnold. They could have franchise tagged him and then reworked a new contract or at least traded him, but that's not happening at this point. There's a report that was put out by someone else that said that the reason why Sam Darnold's not going to get franchised is because Sam Darnold himself requested that they don't franchise tag him and they let him be free to kind of sign wherever he wants, unless the Vikings are going to end up keeping him, which I think at this point is not going to end up happening. Sam Darnold requested this, right? Sam Darnold feels, hey, if you guys franchise tag me, it's going to limit my options. And that could actually make sense given the fact that there's not a lot of teams that actually need quarterbacks right now. Aaron Rodgers is a free agent. Russell Wilson's a free agent. Justin Fields is a free agent. There's a couple other quarterbacks that are free agents that, kind of have that Geno Smith type upside, right? Josh Dobbs is an example of that. There's a couple other guys as well that are free agents. For Sam Darnold to get a position where he's the starting quarterback, there's only 2 or 3 teams that he can realistically go to. And given the fact that the Titans, one of the 3 teams, are going to actually draft Cam Ward with the number 1 overall pick, to me, that means that one of those 3 teams is gone. There's only 2 teams left. So for Sam Darnold to actually get that contract, it does actually make sense that he requested this from the Minnesota Vikings, right? Let me go find that team I want to kind of be with. Otherwise, the trade's probably not going to come out for the Vikings, and they're going to end up getting stuck with that money regardless. So to me, it's a very, very interesting report that's kind of coming out. And I want to talk about why I think the Raiders should pursue a quarterback like Sam Darnold. And I know so many Raider fans are going to be against this, but we have to be realistic. The quarterbacks on this roster are not good quarterbacks. Gardner Minshew had his opportunity. It was with Luke Getsy, but he had his opportunity, and it did not work out for the Raiders. You look at Aiden O'Connell. He had that opportunity. He ended up getting hurt a couple times. Really didn't look all that good. I think he had one game where he looked pretty good. But for generally speaking, he didn't really look all that good. And we know the limitations that Aiden O'Connell has. I don't think he's a starting caliber quarterback. I think he's a good backup with some upside. But, are you going to go into these next 2 to 3 years with the coaching staff that you have with Aiden O'Connell as your quarterback? I think that's the worst case scenario for the Raiders. And to take it in, even step further, the Raiders have already decided they were going to go with Matthew Stafford if Matthew Stafford agreed to come to the Raiders. But the Raiders went all in on Matthew Stafford. And it ended up not working out, right? The Raiders struck out on Matthew Stafford, but they still decided we'd rather have Matthew Stafford than the 2 guys we have on our roster. Think about that. Aiden O'Connell's 25, 26 years old. He's in his prime or about to enter that time. And the Raiders would have rather went with the declining 37-year-old Matthew Stafford. That tells you all you kind of need to know about the quarterback situation that the Raiders have. Plus, I think Spytek and Pete Carroll have also kind of stated it in their pressers that they're going to add a quarterback. They're going to bring that competition. And I think Sam Darnold is a very, very solid option for the Las Vegas Raiders. You get a perfect situation for a quarterback. That quarterback can have success. And I think what Sam Darnold had with the Vikings last year was pretty good. And we do have to realize the Vikings offensive line was absolutely banged up. Because some people do think that the Vikings offensive line was just like this incredible offensive line. If they're healthy, they're incredible. But Brian O'Neill missed a lot of games last year. Christian Darrisaw pretty much missed the entire season. The Vikings literally had to trade for Cam Robinson, who was with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They literally had to trade for this guy mid-season because their backups kind of, continued to get hurt, and they were missing, most of the last season. They had a, guard situation where they had to pick up a guard after like 5 weeks into the season, right? So there's, the Vikings offensive line wasn't perfect. And I just kind of wanted to make that point because the situation the Vikings had around Sam Darnold wasn't perfect, right? It was a good situation, but the Raiders situation isn't that bad either. You have Brock Bowers, you have Trey Tucker, you have Jacoby Myers. You have the 6th overall pick, which you could easily add a wide receiver. You could potentially add a franchise tackle. You have Jack Sparrow-Johnson, and you have that franchise left tackle as well. You can add a running back, which we're going to talk about here in a second. The situation the Raiders could put Sam Darnold in could be a pretty good situation. And we have the coaching staff in place. And never overlook the fact that we have a legit coaching staff. And that's arguably the most important part of all of this, right? Is having that coaching staff that can kind of come together. And I think with a guy like Sam Darnold, we also have to realize some people are going to say Sam Darnold's not worth, 35, 40, 45 million. And I understand what people are going to say with that. But we have to realize Trevor Lawrence makes $60 million a year. Dak Prescott makes $60 million a year. At the moment, Tua Tagovailoa and Jared Goff, average-ass quarterbacks, $53 million a year. And again, that's not their entire contract. That's per year, right? Tua's not making $53 million over 5 years. That's per year. They're making $53 million. Deshaun Watson's getting $46 million. To me, Sam Darnold, although he isn't a top 5 quarterback right now, he has potential. He has upside. There was a time when people were like, Baker Mayfield's not good. Geno Smith is not good. There was a time where people were saying even, like a quarterback like Jared Goff, he's not a good quarterback. But you put a good scheme and system around these guys and they can have success. In fact, last year we saw that. When Sam Darnold had a good scheme and system around him, he went 14-3. When was the last time the Raiders had a quarterback that went 14-3, right? Or even 13-3 if you want to look at the 16-game seasons. Last 30 years, who's won 13 games on the Las Vegas Raiders? Which quarterback has done that? Which quarterback for the Raiders has had 4,300 yards and 35 touchdowns to only 12 interceptions? To me, that's an absolute incredible season right there by Sam Darnold. And I understand it's only 1 year that he had this season kind of happen, but we have to also realize Sam Darnold was in a terrible situation with the New York Jets. Like, arguably, one of the worst situations you can have as a quarterback with the New York Jets. They're a terrible franchise. They're drafted terribly. And he wasn't going to have success in that scheme and system no matter how you looked at it. But then he went to the 49ers, a stable organization that kind of, let him do some things, play some football games. And he showed a little bit of upside. He got with a good offensive coordinator, taught him the game. That is Kyle Shanahan that we're talking about. And then he went with Kevin O'Connell, another good offensive coordinator, a guy that knows how to design plays. And I know Kevin O'Connell's a head coach, but he's an offensive coordinator in my opinion. 4,300 yards, 35 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. To me, there's potential with Sam Darnold. And the thing is, you can either say, hey, well, Sam Darnold's not good enough. We'll wait until Matthew Stafford becomes available, or we'll wait until Justin Herbert becomes available. We'll pay those guys $70 million a year when they become available, right? And that might be the final 2 years of their careers. You might say, hey, let's just go in and let's reach for Shedeur Sanders, who's seen his draft stock absolutely tank. Let's reach for Jackson Dart, 6th overall pick. Let's reach for these guys who might bust out. Or, maybe we pay a guy like Sam Darnold $35, $40 million, and the upside with Sam Darnold is through the roof. Maybe we kind of go down this path, right? If you're the Las Vegas Raiders, you have to, really consider these different scenarios. And the fact that the Minnesota Vikings are at the point where they're going to let this guy walk, the fact that Sam Darnold understands the situation he's in, there's not a whole lot of opportunity actually available this season. The fact that for the Raiders, if you bring in Sam Darnold, you're not giving up a first-round pick. The fact that's all happening for the Raiders potentially, what do you have to lose to give Sam Darnold a 3-year contract? Let's say it's $120 million, which comes out to $40 million a year. What do you have to lose to say we're going all in with Sam Darnold? Right? As opposed to the opposite side of it is hey, let's draft Shedeur Sanders with the 6th overall pick. And Shedeur Sanders bust out, and now you miss out on Abdul Carter. You miss out on Travis Hunter. What's better if you're the Las Vegas Raiders? Get a quarterback. You go 3 years in with this quarterback, right? Something you haven't really done, right? Like, truth be told, the Raiders have kind of just went with, average quarterbacks forever. They had some success with Derek Carr. Didn't really work out, right? Derek Carr started to decline a little bit after that injury in 2016. 2018, he was still, kind of average. 2019, we kind of realized at that point that the Raiders kind of needed to move off of Derek. But the Raiders did move off of Derek, and you don't go down the path of let's get a rookie quarterback. You weren't really in position to get a rookie quarterback, truth be told. And you don't get a rookie, right? And now you're at the point where you go with Jimmy G, you go with Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. None of that's worked out for the Raiders, right? We're running 5-6 games this season. Like, if you want to actually have success, maybe we change the strategy up a little bit, right? And we got to realize with Sam Darnold, you give him $40 million a year. That doesn't mean the cap hits are going to be $40 million per year, right? You can design these contracts in a way where the cap hits are lower in the actual 3 years that he's here, and incur dead cap hits in the 2 years he's not here, right? If it doesn't work out, 2 years of dead cap hits, to me, not really a big deal. I think it's worth it for the Raiders to go down this path of potentially bringing in Sam Darnold, especially if it's free. And the only thing you got to do is just pay this guy what he kind of wants. Given the quarterback market, I think it makes sense for the Raiders to go down that path. I wouldn't be mad if the Raiders said, hey, let's go forward with Justin Fields. I'd actually be excited if the Raiders say, hey, we're going to go down the path of Aaron Rodgers. I think Rodgers is the best option, especially given the fact that, one, Rodgers is free to have. Two, his contract's going to be very, very low, right? To me, that's a win-win for the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, obviously, Aaron Rodgers, there's not a whole lot left long-term wise, but if you're going to go 2 or 3 years in with the quarterback, I'd be okay with Aaron Rodgers if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders. Worst case scenario, you suck this next year, and then you just draft the quarterback the following year, right? There's a couple of good quarterbacks coming out in next year's class. But I wouldn't mind Sam Darnold either, right? And even if you suck this year with Sam Darnold, you can still draft the quarterback, keep Sam Darnold, right, for another year before you ultimately cut him. And then, that'll be the second year of that rookie quarterback that you end up drafting. I would be all in if I'm the Las Vegas Raiders. We'll see what ends up happening. There's a couple other reports that I want to talk about. So, Ryan Fowler, pretty solid NFL insider. He's more on the college side, truth be told. He put it out there. He said one of the premier prospects in this class, Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty, has top 30 visits scheduled with both the Chicago Bears and the Las Vegas Raiders. A source is confirmed. Jeanty is a 2-time All-American, rushed for 2,600 yards last year, the second most in a single season in FBS history. So the Las Vegas Raiders have a top 30 visit with Ashton Jeanty, and I want to talk about this a little bit, right? Because we know the Raiders running back room was absolutely garbage this past season. And it's kind of funny, going back to before the season actually begun. I remember getting a lot of pushback saying that the Raiders, may have made a mistake going in with Zamir White as like their RB1. Zamir White hasn't really proven anything, and a lot of people agreed with me, but the Raiders still went with this approach where they said we're going to go with Zamir White as RB1. And it never worked out, right? Like, Zamir White's not a good running back. And I think all of us kind of understand that he's not quick. He doesn't have the footwork and the vision. He might be good on a straight line, right? He has pretty good speed on a straight line, but you don't run in a straight line. And I think the Raiders are at this point where we don't have any good running backs on this roster. Like, you can make the argument we have 0 running backs that are future legit running backs, or guys that you're going to actually give the ball to on the offensive side. Maybe Dylan Labe, maybe he develops a little bit this year. There's also a chance Labe's just a special teams guy. Maybe he develops into a third down guy. But he hasn't really proven anything. And then, of course, Zamir's not a good running back. Alexander Madison's a free agent. Really not that good of a running back. Even Amir Abdullah, right? He's kind of average. The Las Vegas Raiders might have something with one of these rookies. And more than that, they might need to even bring in 2 of these guys. So Ashton Jeanty is going to be on a top 30 visit. So the Raiders are obviously interested if they're bringing him in for a top 30 visit. You get 30 of these visits. And they're using one on a guy that is probably going to have to be an option with the 6th overall pick. You're not going to get Ashton Jeanty in the 2nd round. And I do think it's an interesting decision that the Raiders will have when that time kind of comes. When the Philadelphia Eagles said, hey, we're going to bring in Saquon Barkley, it made sense for the Eagles. The Eagles had a phenomenal offensive line. The best offensive line in the NFL by far. The Eagles had a great defensive line. They have a good 2 sets of receivers. They have a pretty good quarterback. They have a pretty good, system around those guys with Kellen Moore kind of coming in for that season. They had a really, really good linebacker group, one that definitely outproduced expectations. And then they had a good young up-and-coming secondary, and then they had Vic Fangio, the best defensive coordinator in the NFL, putting that together. Bringing in Saquon Barkley made sense for the Philadelphia Eagles because everything else was A+ for the Philadelphia Eagles. Bringing in Ashton Jeanty for the Raiders might not make as much sense because we're not in that same spot, right? Think back when the Giants drafted Saquon Barkley. The Giants had a bad offensive line, and for like 4.5, 5 years, Saquon Barkley didn't do a whole lot. Like, yes, he looked explosive at times. He definitely looked good at times. But he didn't do a whole lot in terms of the production for the Giants because the Giants were not really run well, right? They didn't have a great offensive line. Some of the guys they did draft, like Evan Neal, for example, ended up busting out. It just never really worked out for that team. And I think for the Raiders, if you're going to go down this path of, hey, let's take the best running back, the potential next, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, if we're going to take that next guy that's in that mold of running backs, the Raiders got to make sure their offensive line is in a good spot as well. And here's another interesting thing. With the 6th overall pick, you can go in multiple different directions. I don't think the Raiders are gonna take an offensive tackle with the 6th overall pick. They might take Armin Membaugh out of Missouri. That could definitely happen, but something tells me they're not going to go down that path, especially given you have DJ Glaze under contract for 3 more years, and he showed a little bit of upside. But you could go down the path of wide receiver, right? Like you can say, hey, Travis Hunter, Matthew Golden, or Tetra McMillan, maybe some Mekabuka at Ohio State. You can go down this path and say, we're going to go ahead and ultimately take one of these other positions on the offensive side. Maybe you say we want a D tackle or a defensive end, right? Maybe you fall in love with one of these guys coming out on the defensive line. To me, that could make sense, and that makes your team a lot better. Taking a running back is an interesting decision if the Raiders kind of went down this path. Now, obviously, we need a running back, right? No matter what you think of the running back position, the Raiders need a running back. And they need a good one as well, right? Like, you can't come out of this draft without one of the top 10 running backs in this class. And if you go with, like, the 8th best running back, you better get 2 of those guys, right? Like, the 8th best and the 14th best. Because if the 8th best doesn't pan out right away, you would hope that 14th best does, right? You need production out of the running back position as you kind of go forward. And Ashton Jeanty gives you that, definitely with the 6th overall pick. I'm just not 100% sure if running back is the biggest need for the Raiders. I wouldn't be mad at bringing Ashton Jeanty, though. Some people do have concerns with his size. I think he measured in the 5'8 range. Don't quote me on that. He might have measured in the 5'9 range. But he's definitely a lot smaller. Right? Like Bijan Robinson is like 2.5 inches taller than him. Saquon Barkley's 3.5 inches taller than Ashton Jeanty, right? So some people do think he might be a little small for running backs. But we'll see what ends up happening. Finally, let's wrap this up.
The 2 people that I spoke to were in meetings and had these individual meetings that I just laid out to you, what they are, who's in there, and why they're important. Teams in the top 10 drafting that need a quarterback. The 2 people that I spoke to in these positions left the meeting feeling like Shedeur Sanders was not overly concerned with what they thought of him. They had a 15-minute meeting with them, and when they were done, they both said in different ways, different words, that they did not feel like Shedeur Sanders cared all that much about what that organization thought of him. Fascinating, right?
Right. And that's not said in any kind of a positive light, correctly. It wasn't like they came in there and he knew who he was and he wasn't concerned about impressing us. It's more of a negative tone, the way you're saying that, right? You're saying it in a way that he did not come in with, ready to impress, ready to show us what kind of a young man he is, what kind of a leader he can be, all of the positive things. That's what you're saying, correct?
This was not okay. I'll make a joke in a second, but I do. All right. So let's go through this in the right order. A couple of the quotes that I put in there. One said that it wasn't a professional approach. One person that I talked to said the best way I can describe it is it just wasn't it wasn't a professional approach. Shedeur Sanders did not take a professional approach to this interview. The other person I talked to said he wasn't taking it seriously at all. I didn't get the sense that he was taking it seriously. So when you hear it wasn't a professional approach and you hear he wasn't taking it all that seriously, that's not the interview that it's not the response you're looking for from a potential suitor, from somewhere you plan to go play. Now, I think it's also important, because I'm sure people pull clips and have all sorts of things to say. It's very important, and hear me when I say this. There was no bad behavior. There was nothing disrespectful said or done. There was no kind of altercation. And it wasn't like Good Will Hunting when Ben Affleck went in for Matt Damon and put his feet up on the desk and yelled, "Retainer, retainer." Like, it wasn't that. So I'm not trying to like overblow this to try to get clicks and people get, this is not a viral moment. I don't care about the attention this gets. It's just our job to relay the information and the intel that we're getting from people that are important and make decisions or part of the decision process, from the teams that are looking to draft a quarterback and have a high draft pick.
So there you guys have it, right? So Shedeur Sanders apparently doesn't care, according to Todd McShay. And I just find it interesting that these are some of the things that are kind of starting to come out. Because some people don't think from a character perspective there's anything wrong with Shedeur. And I don't think from a character perspective there's anything wrong with him either, right? Truth be told, I've listened to a lot of his interviews. He just seems like a general, average kid. Now, it is a little bit different for Shedeur. Shedeur is obviously, from the time he was like 15 years old, kind of just gotten a crazy amount of hype. And the camera's always kind of been on him, but he's always handled himself well. And I would never, ever, ever say, hey, there's like a character thing that's kind of an issue for me, and I wouldn't draft him because of that. I've always had issues with Shedeur Sanders' tape. Never with the actual character. To me, he's not, he's an okay passer, but when it comes to throwing the ball 25 plus yards, the ball placement's kind of shaky. When it comes to the actual arm strength, to me, it's a little shaky as well. And he's a good athlete, but not a great athlete. And I think, when your arm talent is not, like, let's say you're not in the top 10 or 12 in the NFL in terms of the actual arm talent, you got to make that up with the legs and the athleticism. And to me, Shedeur just doesn't have that. And that doesn't include the pocket presence and those type of things, playing within structure. At this point, I think a lot of people think that Shedeur Sanders is not going to get drafted in the top 10. And if he doesn't get drafted in the top 10, and let's say he falls out of the first round somehow, right? Let's say the Steelers decide at 21 they don't want Shedeur Sanders. Let's assume the Dolphins decide we don't want him, right? We're good with Tua Tagovailoa. Let's assume like some of these other teams that might have aging quarterbacks, right? The Rams. Let's say one of these quarterback teams decide, hey, we don't want Shedeur, we're going to let it go. And let's say only one quarterback goes in the first round. I think the Raiders have to have a realistic conversation about drafting him when that second round kind of comes around. And I wouldn't be mad if the Raiders traded up, pick 31 or 32 to draft Shedeur Sanders. If it came down to Shedeur slipping in the draft, which I do think is going to end up happening, I think the Raiders have to realistically think about still bringing this kid in, because there's still potential with Sanders no matter how you look at it. And I think a second round pick makes a lot more sense, especially if you kind of go in with a quarterback like Justin Fields or Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, where these guys are not your long term, right? I think it would make sense to go in and bring another quarterback in the second round, right? I find all these reports that are kind of coming out interesting because, some people are going to say, hey, a lot of this stuff is just made up things and a lot of it isn't true. But we have to also think back, over the last like 4 or 5 years, we've heard different reports that definitely tank guy stocks, right? Jalen Carter, for example, we had this story that kind of came out. Some people started questioning his character. Jalen Carter was the best player in that draft class by far. There's no questions about it. And we're seeing that actually play out now. And he still fell to the 9th, 10th overall pick. We had 6, 7 non-quarterbacks drafted before him, right? To me, Jalen Carter was the best player in that class, and he still fell. Another guy, as an example, Jerzon Newton, right? People were like, hey, this is a top 10 defensive tackle based off the tape. He was at Illinois, I think, last year. And his tape was really, really good, right? Truth be told, he had better tape than all the other D tackles in that class. But we still saw Byron Murphy go, I think, 15th overall to the Seahawks. And I think we might have had 1, 2 other D tackles go before Newton. Newton might be the best D tackle, at least based off his rookie tape, right? The Commanders got him in the second round. So sometimes we do hear reports that are actually true, right? Will Levis is another example. Everybody's like, this is the first overall pick. If he doesn't go number 1, he'll go in the top 3 or 4. And as the draft got closer, we heard these reports. He's not going to be a first-round quarterback. And by the time the draft came around, he was not a first-round quarterback, right? So those things do happen where these reports are accurate, right? So I don't want people to just overlook the stuff that's coming out with Shedeur, because sometimes things are fake, because sometimes things are real, right? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think, man. What would you do if you're the Las Vegas Raiders? Do you go in with Sam Darnold? Do you go in with Shedeur Sanders? Do you try getting a quarterback with pick 6 or maybe in the 2nd round? Let me know in the comments below. Thumbs up, subscribe, and I will see you guys next time with another video.